Hi and welcome to Behind the Headlines on the Soft Radio Network. I'm Neil Bradley. With me as always, Joe Quinn. Say hello, Joe.
What's up?
What's up? It's good to be here. Today is Sunday, April 20th, 2016. This week we're going to be talking about, we're going to kick it off with a discussion of the big news over the last week. In fact, the story, I think, broke right after we finished last week's show on Sunday evening. It's a shocker, right? Get this. World leaders might be a little bit corrupt. Are you shocked?
Did you say it's April 20th?
I did. Excuse me. It's April 10th. For some reason, I had April 20th in my head. I had to correct my own show notes twice before coming in here. I was at April 20th. What? No, it's April 10th. April 10th. So, yeah, this is no April Fool's joke. World leaders are dallying in corruption. Oh, my God.
Shock horror. Oh, my God. Who would ever have thought it? I mean, just look at their track record over the past 13, 14, 15, 5, 50, 60, 100 years. It's just such a shocking thing, but, yeah, obviously it's not shocking at all. What is shocking? Well, what's kind of good about it, I suppose, is that it has... a little bit of it has come to public attention because the public aren't really aware of anything that's going on unless the media tell them what's going on. And this has been an opportunity for the media to actually say, yeah, politicians are a bit corrupt, aren't they? They're a bit hypocritical. You know the way they get us to pay taxes and then they're not paying taxes themselves? Wee bit suspect there. Kind of, maybe we should be a bit annoyed about that. But of course... as we know in this world, the truth doesn't really come out in any kind of full, in-your-face kind of way. It tends to leak out in little bits and pieces, and I think that's what's going on here. For whatever reason, just a little bit of the truth has come out, and it's amazing because it's enough to get a lot of people very angry. Can you imagine what would happen if the whole truth came out?
Uh-huh. Having said that, though, Joe, you mentioned during the week that if there's one issue that will get people riled up on the streets, however they express their reaction, it's taxes.
Yeah, because that's where people feel it directly in their pockets, directly in their homes, and it impacts their quality of life in a very, very direct way, and that's unfortunately the state of the situation for most people on this planet, that it's they can only be provoked really to react or to do something or to feel indignant or angry at the state of corruption on our planet when it affects them directly. So of course you can imagine that people in, for example, other countries that aren't directly affected by this or haven't been directly named by the media, they're not so concerned. But British people were concerned because it was largely focused on David Cameron, although the media tried to do a Putin on it at the beginning, which was kind of funny. I was watching it on the night that this came out, and the first media reports, first articles were being penned, and I commented, it was in the UK Independent, I commented that on their inclusion of a picture of Putin as the headline picture of their article, and in the article itself, in the first couple of paragraphs, it said that Putin had not been actually named himself. It was someone associated with him, and that was the justification for including the picture of Putin, which was just absolutely laughable, because it's like he's the go-to person for anything that goes wrong anywhere, anytime. If in any way you can link Putin to it, then get a picture of Putin up there. If there's an earthquake and somebody that Putin knows or knows Putin was in the area at the time, you could put massive earthquake hits, Afghanistan, Putin implicated. Putin may be involved. So it's kind of fun. It's that ridiculous in this case, especially since he wasn't actually, they had to admit he wasn't named specifically, and yet, what do you call him? That strawberry-nosed
Cameron.
jumped up snobby twerp. What's his name? Cameron, yeah. He was named directly. And yet they didn't see fit to put his picture on there, which is bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. And in fact, so I commented that in the article, in the comments, and in fact some other people had commented at the same time, words to that effect. And it was interesting that I think other, like the BBC and different UK outlets of bullshit had done the same thing and highlighted the Putin angle, and other people on those websites had also said, hang on a minute, Putin is, what's going on here, you know? So eventually they all changed their picture. Within a few hours, they all changed the picture on their headlines, which was interesting. So, yeah, but so it's all about offshore tax hiding stuff. You know, one rule for them, another rule for us in terms of paying taxes. And in fact, you know, the interesting thing about it, the angle on it is that there's so many kind of nuances to it that just are not true. For example, you're talking about politicians, for example. You can't really make the comparison in terms of we have to pay our taxes. Like a UK citizen has to pay his taxes and is hounded by the government for any kind of non-payment of taxes or tax fraud. And also, the politicians, therefore, should also pay their taxes. But the ordinary person pays taxes on income that they generate, which is directly from the kind of the sweat of their brow and producing something useful to society. Politicians get their income from people's taxes, and they don't really do very much constructive at all with that. So you can't really even equate this as or you can't even present this as we have to pay taxes, so should politicians, because politicians, politicians, for example, dodging their tax is much more egregious than an ordinary person dodging their tax. You know, for the reasons I just gave, in that the money that politicians get comes from our taxes. So it's like they're taking our tax money, paying them and enriching themselves with it, and not giving some of it back in the taxes. But there's also the angle of the offshore angle, which is kind of another bit of a limited hangout. Yeah, there's something like $2 or $3 trillion estimated to be hiding in these bank accounts or in behind phony corporations and in places like the British Virgin Islands and Panama and several other kind of tax havens around the world, which is a lot of money, because, you know, $2-3 trillion, you could, even if you put a 10% tax on that, that's something like what, 200 million, 200 billion, sorry, in taxes that could be distributed around. But the problem is that the real problem is onshore tax havens, not offshore, and places that aren't actually tax havens at all, not officially, like the UK. Mm-hmm. The UK, for example, is a tax haven for major corporations. Most people know that, and the US as well. Most people know that big corporations pay almost, in some cases pay no tax whatsoever, and in other cases pay tiny amounts of tax compared to the ordinary person. There's for example, I'll give you an example here. Google, which is generates a lot of money. Google generated £11.8 billion. This is just in the UK alone of revenue in the 5 years between 2006 and 2011, and they paid just 16 million in corporation tax. So they paid 16. What's the percentage? 16 million of 11.8 billion. It's about 1.5%, I think. Google paid 1.5% tax.
Sounds like it could be less than that.
I think it's 100th.
Yeah.
It's a bit more than 100 times 16 million. Oh, maybe it's actually less. It's maybe a tenth of 1%. It's like 0.15% of tax they paid in 5 years. Microsoft, in the UK and Ireland paid a similar amount. And that's just two examples. There's plenty of other corporations that all use kind of funnel their profits through subsidiaries in the UK, for example, or in other countries. It's kind of it's like it's a bait and switch, or it's a con job basically, where they'll take all the money that they make in one country, they'll shove it into a different country, and transfer that revenue over to a different country that has a lower rate of tax, and claim, in the UK we only made 10 million, where they made 100 million, whatever, so they don't pay that amount of tax and stuff. So it's basically, the bottom line is that this is complete crookery and robbery, and these are companies that are generating vast amounts of money in countries through the efforts and the sweat of the brow of the ordinary people in those countries, who are all paying their taxes, but these companies that are making maybe more money than the combined number of people that they employ are not contributing their share back to the economy. So they're effectively taking out of the economy and not giving back. And that's how's a country meant to be run, how are services and infrastructure meant to be kept up when that is, that is the process that's followed. And that's obviously done with the connivance of governments, because governments are happy to allow big corporations to come into countries, and they want to entice them to come in to, as they say, give jobs. We want to create some jobs. So let's get Google or Microsoft or whoever else to set up in the UK or anywhere, and they'll create jobs. And this is good, and they'll tell everybody, yeah, that's what we want. We want you to have some jobs. Don't you want some jobs? Let's have some more jobs. What they really want, the real motivation is not really creating jobs, but rather for them the most important indirect or direct result of job creation, which is more taxes. The more jobs you have, the more people working, the more you can squeeze them for taxes, and the more the government can, pay itself, pay government officials, salaries and expense accounts and all that kind of stuff, and live high on the hog. And that's why they're happy to let these corporations give them a cut, or let them do shady deals with their taxes, not pay taxes, because they're not really interested in the amount of taxes that the company should pay, but rather interested in the taxes that the employees of the company will pay. So it's all about ordinary people being the slaves, basically, the ones to be exploited, whereas the slave owners, technically, which would be the corporations and their political friends, or the slave masters, effectively, they don't do very much and reap the benefits. And it's all from the sweat of your brow.
Yeah.
So
some of the figures going around are wow. So long before this scandal, in quotes, broke, the figures used, in fact, it's prior to 2008, figures estimated in private wealth held in so-called offshore tax havens was anywhere between 21 and 40 trillion dollars. That's just private wealth. Then there's corporate wealth that corporations are hiding and or making the most, getting the most return out of. Because it's not technically hiding, because it's all quite legal. So you can only imagine that's probably on a scale of magnitude greater than tens of trillions. I mean, another figure to put it into some more perspective, half of the privately held money offshore is held by an estimated 100,000 individuals. 100,000. 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, 100,000. I mean...
Well, that's the 1% of...
What's really interesting about this...
1% of 1%.
There's a pattern, there's a historical pattern. this has come out now. Okay, fine. You know this is only the tip of the iceberg when the figure I just gave you, between 21 and 40 trillion, is held by private individuals. 100,000 of them hidden from the taxman. In 1929, when the crash happened, anyone who was in the know or had their wits about them at least didn't remove the stock from the United States and other countries, but at least managed to protect the value of it. And they moved them into places like Panama.
Mm.
Of course, there was basically a run on the stock market. We all know what happened next. Stock market totally collapsed, and that gave rise to the Great Depression. While everyone else was suffering, everything else was parked. It's like a substantial amount of the wealth of the economy was parked and protected, they believed, in these offshore accounts, particularly in Panama.
Mm-hmm.
Panama's been used in a big way before, and I would suspect, I didn't see any attempt to collate figures, but I suspect there was a massive jump in the funneling of wealth after the 2008 crash.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got way worse than it ever was before.
Yeah.
Panama's a really interesting case. Panama was created for the express purpose of being a tax haven.
Mm-hmm.
The United States basically forced Colombia to give up a province called Panama because they knew they were about to build a canal on it and to control global shipping through that area. And this came about, it became a tax haven as a consequence of this free trade zone. JP Morgan, no secret there, it was the actual fiscal agent for the Corporation of Panama, which was set up by the U.S. administration in 1903 or 04. So it goes back to then. And yeah, Panama as tax haven, it was created for that purpose. And there are a number of sites like that on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about this. Mossack Fonseca. Mossack Fonseca.
So the two founders of this company that's in the spotlight, Mossack Fonseca, who it was established in the 70s. The story goes that 11.5 million documents have been pilfered or hacked from them by some anonymous source given to the German newspaper. And these documents extend in time to the very creation of this company, 1970 to 2015. That's probably partly why there's so many documents. Someone took the entire track record of what happened through this one company. It was set up by two guys, Jürgen Mossack, who's German citizen by birth anyway, and a Panamanian lawyer. That's Ramon Fonseca. Mossack is the German guy. Has got a very interesting history. Born in Bavaria in 1948, his father Erhard Mossack was a Roten Führer, a senior corporal in the Waffen SS during World War II. According to U.S. intelligence files, he offered to spy for the Americans. Mossack's father moved to Canada with his family in the early 1960s, where he offered his services to the Central Intelligence Agency to supposedly spy on the communists in Cuba. In 2016, it didn't say when. I'm reading this. This is a Wikipedia entry. They don't say when. I imagine this is in the run-up to the leaks. The German intelligence. It must be after the story broke last week. When contacted by journalists, German intelligence said they had documents relating to Erhard Mossack, but would not share any information owing to possible security risks. Indeed. So there's a can of worms there, as you can see. So this guy Mossack is basically born and bred into a CIA operation. I say that because 1948, his father's already is basically part of the Operation Paperclip transfer of German Nazi intelligence assets to the United States, and the newly created CIA. So from the very beginning, this guy Mossack is CIA. So that's interesting. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. Other things going on in the background here. You know, there's millions of people out in the streets recently in Brazil calling for the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, who was only recently re-elected president of Brazil. And there's been a scandal, in quotes, going on there for a few months, given the media title Operation Car Wash. The scandal is basically that a number of Brazilian officials are accused of pilfering public funds via Petrobras, which is Brazil's large state-owned oil company. Rousseff herself is implicated. The former Brazilian president Lula is also implicated, although in fact there's very little evidence against either of them. But it's been enough of a kerfuffle in Brazil that Rousseff is up for impeachment. And there'll be a vote in Parliament in Brazil this week. So she may be on the way out. She herself is crying foul, saying it's a coup, it's a coup. Of course, I think I know what she means by that, but it's not going over well with the Brazilian public. They seem to be in support of the corrupt Rousseff, in quotes. Now, here's the connection to this other scandal. Mossack Fonseca is the company that was used to create a number of offshore companies in the heart of this scandal involving Petrobras in Brazil. Now, this doesn't make Rousseff guilty, but it makes somebody and probably the clique of oligarchs in Brazil, I imagine, being in the thick of it. So now you've got only a one remove CIA, Mossack Fonseca, and then Rousseff kicked out of Brazil, which is the largest country in South America. And it's not hard to see how there's some serious manipulation going on here. The first, Joe mentioned the obviously idiotic attempts to associate Putin with the breaking story, but there's something odd about this. Listen, the amount of this is the biggest leak in all history, right? So 11.5 million files. Someone hacks it, gives it to the German newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. They then turn this 2.6 terabyte hard drives over to the Washington-based International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, an NGO that's funded by the Ford, Rockefeller, and Soros foundations. And then 400 journalists, in quotes, we don't know who they are, apparently spent the last year combing through the files in secret somewhere in Washington, D.C. Maybe in the Pentagon, who knows. And now they've kept it secret and they just happen to bring it out now.
Right.
Of course, in those files, there's a who's who of elites all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Which files did they select to open the story? Obviously, they went for the dirtiest they could find on Putin, which is that the godfather of his daughter may or may not have been the director of a shell company, which is pretty weak sauce. If that's the worst they got in that 11.5 million files, but then did somebody make a mistake of including Cameron there? Because they've got Cameron in some serious trouble now.
Mm-hmm. It could be prelude to. It could be. It seems to me that the question is this international consortium of silly journalists that is funded or owned by the Rockefeller Foundation, amongst others, is. That's that right there has to have a kind of large red flag on it, in the sense of what does the Rockefeller Foundation have to do with, or what interest does it have in exposing?
Well, freedom and democracy, of course.
Right, of course, which is bullshit, right? So these people, near the top of the heap on this planet, have a long track record of being involved in revolutions and color revolutions in different parts around the world. So, but they also may be, this may be a strategic leak of information to try and, they may be sacrificing Cameron. It's possible. The fact of the matter is that prime ministers and presidents and stuff aren't really very important, and that given time, it's not a big problem to just throw one of them to the masses to appease their anger, to allow them to let off a bit of steam. So I'm not sure that Cameron's going to resign over this, but certainly it's opened up a lot of kind of a can of worms, in the sense of making government corruption and government hypocrisy
front and center.
Right, making it available, or making information available, bringing it to the awareness of the ordinary people who otherwise are just, don't really care, or turn a blind eye to most things, or quietly complain about things but don't do anything about it. But like we were saying at the start of the show, when you more or less expose a sitting prime minister as a hypocrite, particularly over the basic duty of every citizen to pay their taxes, well, it looks to me like, that's not an accident, and that the fact that most of these documents will not be made public. There's two possibilities. One is that all of the duty details are already out there, which is unlikely. Although maybe there's another layer behind this. Maybe this is just for the idiots, the kind of stupid people, the useful idiot types, politicians included, and celebrities, etc. This is the place that they go to hide their money, but there's a different way that the even higher ups hide their money effectively, And I'm sure they do it legally. The problem with this is that the fat cat elite of this world, aren't stupid enough, aren't naive enough to simply hide their money in a way in which it could be exposed at some point that is officially illegal. They're smart enough to actually have their money in organizations and tied up in various different things that are all legal, particularly that in the financial sectors and in controlling. Basically, the best way to hide your money, if you've got a bunch of stolen money that you've gotten from by ultimately illegal means, which also could be legal because you passed it into law. Basically, they're talking about people who have the ability to pass laws that make things legal, even though it's fundamentally immoral or illegal, fundamentally immoral. What these people would do is the Rockefellers of this world have their money tied up in owning most or large parts of the world, and that's not illegal to own industries all around the world. And in that case, those people, you're talking about governments are having close ties to governments, close ties to, basically owning governments in such a way that you can invest in a country. You can they invest in countries, in the sense, the way that Rockefellers and those kind of people, the higher ups organize things is they buy bonds. They use the financial markets to buy bonds in countries. And when you talk about buying bonds in countries, you're talking about effectively investing in the entire country, in the product of the entire country. And if you buy a bond, or if you own a lot of bonds in a certain country, government bonds, Greek government bonds, for example, what you're buying there effectively is
stock of the country,
the product of every single person in the country.
You're betting on the country doing better or worse.
You're buying shares in their sweat,
basically
in their energy, and that way you can control. And then if you have political control, well, then you can make the country go in a certain direction that maximizes those kind of the profits you want to get back from those people in the country. For example, make them work harder, extend their working week, cut their pay, cut healthcare services, all that kind of stuff. That'll increase the revenue that the country gets, and therefore increase the revenue that you get. So this whole offshore business, because the point I'm making is that it's possible that the vast majority of the rest of these documents are the names of ordinary people who are quite wealthy and wanted to not pay taxes, and also hosts of celebrities, footballers, pop stars, all the. So at that level, you're not talking about kind of high crimes in that sense. You know what I mean? This is institutionalized kind of tax evasion that has been around for quite a long time. And people have done it. It's become normal. It's become acceptable. Oh yeah, just put it over in the Cayman Islands there, and Mossack Fonseca will set you up with a company. You can create the company. That can be the money you want to not pay tax on. Can be the actual the capital of the company. You can just sit there and not do very much, and then when you want it, you can just get it back and buy a boat or something. You know, so it's pretty small time stuff here. You know, in that sense. You know, but of course, if you're talking about 100,000 people. I don't know, 100,000 was 100 times 10 is 1 million, times 1,000 is 1 billion. So you're talking about, 10,000, 100, maybe each of those 100,000 people having a couple of million, maybe, on average, or 1 million on average. 100,000 times 1 million is what? That's 100 billion. So 10 would be in the trillions. I don't know. Work it out. The point being, I don't think it's a lot of money if you divide it by 100,000 people, allowing for the fact that people can have 10 million. It's not, I mean, footballers get paid freaking 2 million a week, or not 2 million, 200,000 a week or something like that. You know, They get paid a crap load of money. So there's a lot of people who earn a lot of money and more than they can really actively spend. So they would stick it. And they don't want to pay taxes on it, so they stick it into one of these offshore accounts. So in that sense, offshoring, and I mean, it's even been available to that's available to the average person in the street. Mm-hmm. The thing is, you could have millions and millions of people doing this. You know, it's become so common.
You can open an account in the Channel Islands,
yeah.
Provided you got enough money to start it.
Yeah.
Protect your money. Yeah. No problem.
Right. So it's fairly normal, and in that sense, and I don't think it's some kind of exposure of the deep, dark secrets of the way the financial system on this planet works. It's just one small aspect of it, but the important thing about it is that that politicians in the UK, for example, David Cameron, have been exposed as being a bunch of lying hypocrites, which they are on so many other topics and so many other areas as well. They're not just lying about their taxes; they have lied to you about pretty much everything. They lie all the time.
Mossack Fonseca has an estimated 5% of hidden, or has managed an estimated 5% of hidden offshore wealth. 5%. That's a relatively small player, and they opened and managed not at any one time, but there's named in the files are 500,000 companies, and they're a small time player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the British Virgin Islands, an estimated 25%,
right,
of the world's shell companies are based there.
Right.
That's a whole other scale.
Right, that's 5 times as much as Panama. So why is it focused on Panama? The Panama Papers, blah, blah, blah. You've got the British Virgin Islands, which are basically pretty much a British colony in the Caribbean, owned and controlled by the British government. And they have 5 times as many more of these companies than Panama does. Why isn't it? But, I mean, that's an example of the limited nature of this exposure, you know. So, yeah, 5%, 20 times, you know. 100,000 people in these Panama Papers, that's 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then 20 times that is a whole lot. So that's 2 million. No. Yeah.
2.5 million shell companies in the British Virgin Islands.
Right.
Oh my God. Did you notice that the name of the company that the Camerons have? Blairmore. There's something rich about that. Yeah, Moore, Blair, Tony Blair, exactly the same creature.
Yeah. The thing is, this idea of tax. I mean, what we're really talking here about is kind of tax theft, because while ordinary people pay their taxes, and that those taxes are meant to go to provide infrastructure and services for the people in the country, politicians and other rich people do not pay anywhere near as much taxes, even though they earn much more money, and earn money when they're not really entitled to it. They just give themselves that money. So, in that sense, them not paying their taxes is like stealing money from the ordinary people. They steal money in the sense that they give themselves large salaries and benefits and expense accounts that they're not justified, or they're not really entitled to. So in that way they take money from people's take the sweat of your brow, basically the money that you earn. They take a chunk of it, give it to themselves, and then don't pay tax on it. So and then in that way they're not contributing back to the services in the industry, the infrastructure in the country. But the theft of people's taxes by governments it's the way, particularly in the West, the way countries operate, the way governments run. They basically see ordinary people as cash cows. That the money and the energy that people put into the work that they do, and the wealth, the things / wealth that produces, has always been seen by governments as, free money. To do with what we want. It's ours to basically, let's take some of this. This is too much. This is far too much. I mean, these people are working, 40, 50 hours a week. They're working most of their waking hours for most of their lives. And it's producing an awful lot, more than is necessary, really.
So we'll just set it up so we skim a bit off everyone.
Well, we skim a big chunk off the top. I mean,
well, the bit becomes a chunk.
Well, the way they
go
do
too far, but
it's not that they skim off illegally in that sense. But what I'm saying is that they take that and do it in a legal way, or they do it in a supposedly justified way. Like take war, for example. I mean, they take your tax dollars, and everybody agrees, okay, and they buy, they give that money to arms manufacturers, who then give the army of the country weapons. So your tax dollars are paying for weapons that then are dropped on the heads and on the infrastructure of another country, so that the corporations that are tied to your governments back home can go into that country and take control of that infrastructure and those natural resources in that country that they bombed with your tax dollars, and take control of the wealth of that country and ship all the profits back home to the British corporation, who then give some of those profits to political parties, i.e. to politicians, and also give jobs to politicians on the boards of these companies, and give them money for being on the board of that. And that money that they're being given as the David Cameron or whoever or whatever politician as the director or an executive director of a board of an oil company or a armaments manufacturer or whatever kind of a big business, that money is ultimately your tax dollars, tax pounds, whatever. That money that they have to give to your politicians has just gone around in a loop. It's taken from you, given to the arms manufacturer who bombed a country, that allowed your corporations to go in there to steal the wealth of that country and take the profits back home and give it back to your politicians. That wouldn't be possible without them taking your tax dollars in the first place. So effectively, that is your tax dollars.
Mm-hmm. And they do in the assumed belief that the little people don't know how to manage capital. Therefore, we are the capitalists, and we will take care of it for you.
Yeah, don't know how to manage
principle,
capital.
That might not be wrong. But in practice, what they do with it is utterly destructive.
Right. Well, they could put it back into the economy, etc. In theory, they could build better roads, better housing, they could increase the number of hospitals, and all sorts of things like that make people's lives better. But they don't. They've actually been doing exactly the opposite of that. In the UK, in recent years, particularly since Blair, they have started to destroy, for example, the National Health Service, i.e. close down hospitals and cut the number of jobs in healthcare, thereby making it more difficult for people to get proper healthcare service that they are paying their taxes that's meant to provide back to them, but so they keep taking the taxes but shut down the hospital that your taxes are meant to pay for. And what do they do with that extra money? So they're getting to the point now where they're not even the tax money they've been using up until now to give back to the country. They're just stopping doing that, saying, okay, we're not going to do that. We can't do it anymore. We can't afford it. We have to cut the budget. Yet they've got billions and billions to give to arms manufacturers to bomb other countries. But the idea that people can't manage capital is kind of nonsense as well, because, well, if you've got too much capital, what do you need capital for? I mean, you need enough money to run the country and to provide vital services. If there's too much money, then you basically just, for example, you reduce the work week. You reduce people's labour. Cut the work week down to to 25 hours. Then you won't have so much capital, you won't have to worry what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. The problem here is that the British regime, for example, doesn't see its remit as being managing the country. Its remit is to manage the globe.
Yeah.
In part. Here's what I'm getting at. There's a fantastic article by Dan Glazebrook. We have it on SOT. It was an op-ed on RT. Britain is at the heart of the global tax haven network. He suggests that it was a more or less explicit policy move on behalf of the British government in the 60s when they realized, okay, we're descaling our direct investment and involvement in our colonies. And then this exploded, this tax avoidance scheme, this controlling certain locations in the world for managing the world's finances kicked in as a sort of a more covert means of influencing things. Does that make Britain the top dog on the planet? No, because of course conspicuous by its absence in this whole Panama Papers affair is the lack of any dirt coming up about any US individuals or corporations. But still, this is an interesting way that the light's been shone on, particularly on the City of London, because what's going on at the moment with the UK, they've got the whole Brexit thing going on. They're going to have a referendum on whether or not to leave the European Union. The key issue, really, between Brussels and London is over the fact that it is a tax haven, a giant global casino. And there's a battle going on, not simply over whether it'll leave or not, but Britain does not want to comply with what would be the harmonization of fiscal and financial regulations across the European Union, because it doesn't want such a move to impact its actual remit as opposed to its assumed one, which is simply to look after manage the finances of its own country. No, it's a lot bigger than that. They don't give a toss about the people in their own country. They have much bigger, loftier interests.
Yeah, which is global domination, which is the continuance of the British Empire in an economic sense, basically, where their overt or their official empire went the way of the dinosaurs, supposedly, but they kept the most important part, which is an economic control over the movement of capital. And I mean, there's just a consortium that runs the world in this way through the allocation of money, through the control of money, through currency manipulations. They have a lockdown on it, and they control most countries in that way, and they control them in the sense of squeezing, basically making countries debtor countries to large institutions and to foreign nations like Western nations, and in that way they enslave the people of those foreign countries as well. They create a national debt basically in other countries, and in countries that hold out for too long and resist that kind of influence of basically taking large loans from Western institutions and that you can never pay back, and then allowing access to Western companies to your nation in return for that loan. That debt that country holds then is leverage. I mean, you talk about the IMF and the World Bank and stuff here. They go into countries that they give debts to, then they tell them how to structure their tax system, which directly affects, basically, you got to get more money from all these people. You got to make these people work harder and longer for less, thereby paying back this exorbitant loan that you can never pay back, that we gave you, that we forced on you, by basically, very often in countries in Africa and Asia and stuff, by saying, take this big loan from the IMF or from loans from other major international banks, and we'll give you a kickback, a brown envelope, to the leader of that country. And very often the leader of that country, and particularly in Africa, was installed as part of a coup that was organised by mercenary forces from Western nations.
And
this is the way they control the world.
Most of the time, but now and then they develop pangs of conscience or who knows what, and then they become brutal, evil dictators who must be eradicated from the face of the earth, which is what happened to Noriega in 1989, when the US, which had in the 70s been given a carte blanche to invade Panama to protect the canal, and basically exercised that treaty right and removed Noriega, who became evil when he stopped playing by the unspoken rules of the contract.
Yeah, what amazes me is that people don't figure this out, and they're just led along by the nose, and they can completely forget stuff that happened in just the past, in a few years, in the previous few years. I mean, take Assad, for example, in the kick-off of the Syrian war. I mean, Assad was a lovely man who was feted in Buckingham Palace and met Tony Blair in 2002, and he was friends all the way up until, the late 2000s type thing, and until they started, they decided that they were going to go for a regime change because he wasn't interested in aligning himself with the Western agenda. That he had basically a historic alliance with Russia. Syria had a historic alliance with Russia, and they weren't going to play. They weren't going to change sides, basically. And then he becomes a brutal dictator. People forget. I mean, how can these people justify, inviting someone? And the same was true with Gaddafi, in Paris with Sarkozy and stuff. And then suddenly they become brutal dictators, killing their own people. It's so crass, and obviously, or transparently bullshit, that they've just changed. They're just calling the person a bad name, to whip the ordinary people up into justifying some kind of a war or a bombing campaign in that country, because that the leader of that country did not want to play the game the way the West wanted them to play. So it's just pure demonization and smear campaigns and calling people names, and apparently that's how you can justify wars today. Of course, maybe that's the way it's justified wars throughout history, but we've seen exactly the same thing with Putin, and it's kind of embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for many people who buy into that nonsense, because it suggests that they're not very intelligent at all, even in the face of just being able to just to recognize a problem, a very basic, simple problem, with the fact that you were friends with him yesterday, and today you're calling him a brutal dictator. I suggests to me that you have a hidden agenda. It suggests to me that you want me to think that he's a bad person, when it's not very clear that he's a bad person, because yesterday you were friends with him. He didn't do anything between yesterday and today to justify you calling him a brutal dictator. So why are you calling him a brutal dictator? They can't even work that out. They can't even come to that basic conclusion because they believe that, apparently they believe that politicians tell the truth all the time. But David Cameron's a liar about his taxes. So why would you believe anything else he says? When someone tells lies about one thing, it's reasonable enough to assume, or at least be suspicious, that they may be lying about something else. But apparently...
Absolutely. I was dismayed this week that within the day of the Panama Papers, it really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? The Panama Papers. They had the name ready ahead of it. Anyway, within a day of it breaking. Well, the whole of Iceland was on the streets calling for the head of their prime minister, which they got. It's not clear he's definitely gone, but he's basically too late for him to go back now. He admits culpability in having his name on something that was in the Mossack files. And I was thinking, Icelanders, are you really that dumb? Do you not have some experience now, given what happened 4 or 5 years ago? I mean, you had some success there. You changed the laws in your country. The bankers ended up footing the bill for what happened, and not you. But you've just booted out the guy, or gone along with the booting out of the guy, who was instrumental in protecting you the last time around. And we'll see how this plays out, but I think in one easy move, we've got the first casualty in this operation, if we can call it that.
In this coup?
It's basically been a coup. You've just been had.
Probably.
Did you not learn anything?
Well, yeah. But, I mean, people are worked up by, it's justifiable for people to think, to want their leaders to be impeccable.
I know, this is the thing in taxes.
But this is what we were saying at the beginning of the show, though, is that this isn't really... this isn't... The fact that people have put their money in offshore accounts to avoid paying taxes isn't... in the modern world, is way, way down the list of the kind of egregious crimes that are committed. Yeah. You're talking, like I said, you're talking about pop stars and footballers, sports people, etc., are all on those lists. People who have a few million that they don't want to pay taxes on, and it's become so routine that probably most of those people, it's presented. Certainly, it's become so routine that it's presented those people when they go and talk to one of these companies about setting up a corporation to put their money into. It's probably not. They're not told that this is illegal. You could be prosecuted for this. They're not told that. This is like, well, this is a country, Panama, British Virgin Islands, Channel Islands. These are places that everybody accepts, have very tight secrecy laws on banking, and also where you basically pay very, very little, if any, tax at all. In fact, they don't have any tax on money that's invested in companies in these countries. And nobody's... why wasn't it shut down before? The very idea of a tax haven doesn't sound very offensive. It's like, well, you've got extra money and you don't want the tax man to get it, put it over there. That's what you go to your accountant for, right? You go to your accountant and you ask him, listen, how can I best... what can I do with my extra income so that I reduce the amount of taxes I have to pay? Because there's tax structures in every country where if you keep it in your bank account or something, you'll pay extra tax. If you buy a house, you'll pay less tax. So there's ways to do that. So it's just one step away from saying, well, is there a way where I can pay no tax whatsoever? Yes, stick it in the British Virgin Islands.
Yeah, there's an understanding. It's built into the system in the Australian ABC documentary we have on salt at the moment. The tax inspector interviewed, the Australian tax inspector, explains how it works. Well, we prefer to call it, he says, a low-tax regime or a low-tax environment or something.
Right.
Which is, of course, a less dirty word than a tax haven.
Right.
But he wasn't just being polite. He was explaining that when it's demonstrated that a bank transfer is about to happen between, say, the profits account of the largest corporation, BHP Hilton or something. It's a mining corporation in Australia. They don't hide that the fact that they're going to send a massive tranche of funds to the British Virgin Islands. The Australian government goes, okay, well, there's a smaller tax on sending the money out. I can't remember the term you used for it. There's an understanding that, okay, you know what you're about to do. You're about to hide or to relocate it so that you avoid our 30% corporation tax. Here instead is a 10% withholding tax to remove it from the country. And everyone knows what it's for. And they're happy. You gave us 10%. Oh, we're happy with that. On you go. In the 50 years Mossack has been in operation, I just checked, by the way, they don't have 500,000. They have about half of that, 250,000 shell companies registered there. In the 50 years they've been in operation, not once have they been cited in any scandal whatsoever. And many of them have, and repeatedly. This company, no. It was above board, untouchable, who knows what. Some kind of CIA cutout in some indirect way or possibly very directly. Not once. And then kaboom. The entire tranche, the entire track record, the entire history of this company is just dumped.
But getting back to the original, the history of this guy, Mossack, the German guy, and his father being the SS, and his father basically working for the CIA and moving.
Do you notice their logo looks a bit like a swastika?
Yeah, moved. So the idea when you talk about the CIA, obviously you're getting to the heart of the origin of this idea of a tax haven, countries that are created as tax havens, and it's basically for. It was created by intel agencies for places to put money, large sums of money from drug trafficking and other illegal activities that are engaged in by Western intelligence agencies.
For conducting other illegal activities.
Right, it's basically their black budget. And you can't keep it in the country because it's effectively it would be government money. So it's like the CIA's bank account, basically, that they generate money. CIA, MI6, Mossad, etc., generate money from illegal activities, including drug running and all sorts of other nasty things. And they wanted somewhere to put it. Somewhere that they could, and like you said, Panama was more or less created by America for that, and it was used partly for, or at least largely for that specific purpose. And then it just caught on. It's like money that you don't want to be official money type thing, or if you want it to be secret, to keep it away from, because it's the idea of paying tax on. Of course, the CIA never pay tax on any other illegal money. But because it wouldn't be a tax fraud, it would be drug running and illegal arms shipments and stuff that would they'd be up in court for, not tax evasion. But it's
here's the beauty of this global scheme, whichever. Money doesn't actually go to these places, not even digitally today. It remains parked in the bank accounts in Wall Street, London, and Switzerland. All that's happened is that a screen has come down saying you're not allowed to discover who the ultimate owner of these funds or gold or whatever assets they are, properties. You're not allowed to see it. And it's a screen, it's an artificial screen, a legal screen, that cites the legal authority of the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Panama, where the law there is structured to say, no, you're not allowed to find out the ultimate owner. Whereas in most countries, Western or not, there are, of course, practices in place to say that you must disclose the ultimate beneficiary. That's all it is. They're simply little tiny legalistic trapdoors. Here, 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 and here. Maybe a handful of places really only where it's still in place. Now, the interesting thing is, this isn't the first big scandal about offshore funds of the elites in the last few years. There was one concerning Switzerland that's been running hot and cold for a few years now, concerning UBC, USB, I'm not sure what it is, a Swiss bank. And British banks, and banks aren't really belonging to any country, but that their offices in Switzerland came under a lot of pressure. And the Swiss are changing the regulations to force disclosure of assets. And they're being shut down one scandal at a time. Countries, legal authorities in countries are starting to comply But no one ever touched Panama. Panama will probably be up next. Shut this trapdoor. One at a time, but on a select basis. While all this is going on, the legal authority pushing this the hardest is the United States government. They've been behind. You see the names pop up. They always have something to say about, those dirty Swiss, protecting legal assets, and we want our money back. And while this is going on, there is a flood of money going to tax havens within the United States. Bloomberg ran an article just 2 weeks ago about how Nevada is now the new headquarters for Rothschild, among others. Nevada. So there's a specific regime been set up within the U.S. federal structure that is essentially exactly the same. It's a tax haven. I don't know how it was disclosed that Rothschild is. I do actually. That one of their own spokesmen described it as such in this Bloomberg article. So it's not a secret or anything like that. I can't find it now, but the guy's name was Penny. He was a financial analyst working for Rothschild Co. And he came right out and said it, that the U.S. is going to be the world's biggest tax haven going forwards. I wonder if there's something like, if there is a pattern to not just this scandal, but recent ones, to a tighter leash on the existing subterranean covert network of illicit funds towards seeing the U.S. as, in the end, the only safe haven for your monies, thereby increasing, in many ways, the control that the United States government as a whole has over what anyone does with their money.
Right. Yeah. It's very possible. But of course, they could be heading, like we said, there's an awful lot of people in the world who do this, who have extra cash to spend or extra cash floating around. There's an awful lot of people who use these kind of tax havens, etc. And it is a sizable chunk of it. And the U.S. setting itself up as a go-to place, the safe place for all of those funds. Yeah, but it doesn't change. The reality on the ground for the average person. You're talking about, you mentioned 100,000. There's probably I don't know how many millionaires are there. I don't know. You're talking about millions of people. There's millions of people who possibly have money hidden away in different places like this in the world. But then there's the other.
But we're talking about the big players here.
Then there's the other 7 or 8 billion people on the planet who are just working and paying their taxes. It's kind of it's really the whole thing is to a certain extent, like we said, it's fairly small potatoes in terms of a news story, except in the sense that it has come out that the value of this story is that it's not the fact that such tax havens exist and people use it, but rather that politicians, trumped up, puffed up, toffee-nosed
windbags,
prats, who are on the news every night talking about
austerity,
right?
Must pay taxes,
and it's immoral, and we're going to chase down anybody who tries to avoid paying their taxes. Like in the UK, for example, benefit frauds, which is, when you get the
free riders, scum.
Yeah, unemployment benefits or child benefit or whatever, apparently costs $1 billion a year. And in 2009-10, there were 9,000 cases of prosecutions of ordinary people for, claiming too much benefit, like too much child benefit, too much unemployment benefit. But evasion of direct taxes, which is estimated at $5.5 billion a year, 5 1.5 times that amount were prosecuted about 30 times a year, on average.
Well,
and just a little piece of information: Britain has 54 billionaires, 54 people who have more than £1 billion, and most of them are non-doms, as they call them. They don't actually live there officially.
Non-domiciled in the UK.
Yeah. In 2005, they paid. In 2005 they had a total fortune of 126 billion. Those 54 billionaires, and in 2005 they paid a total of 15 million tax on that 126 billion. So I think that's 0.5% or something like that. Or no, it's actually a bit less. Less than 0.5% tax on their income, the billionaires, whereas every other person's paying 30%, at least 20-30%. So
the unpaid taxes of David Cameron and George Osborne alone would probably account for the missing billion from benefits,
right,
fraudsters and cheaters.
Yeah. So the problem here is the value of this story, the Panama Papers, quote unquote, is that it has highlighted the hypocrisy of these political leaders, trumped up political leaders who are trying to sound moral and, kind of cracking down on ordinary people who aren't paying, who didn't pay, the full amount of their taxes, hitting everybody for, $100, $200, $500 or something like that, and saying that it's immoral and we're going to get you and we won't tolerate this for one moment. These very same people are avoiding paying tax themselves. So the important part of it is that they are. It's highlighting, or it's exposing in one small way the nature and hypocrisy and arrogance of our political leaders, which people really should have figured out by now. But maybe they need this kind of thing to really bring it home to them,
An Australian politician in the ABC broadcast was quoted as saying, "What we're looking at here is a parallel universe." And it really is. It's described in other terms as a breakaway civilization. It's an entirely different world of ramified networks, and this scandal, in quotes, will in no way put a dent in their activities, in their existence. Nevertheless, I agree, there's value to acknowledgement of the fact that it's there, and we'll see what comes from it. It'll be used, it's already been used for cheap political shots. But in the meantime, I wonder how many people that can really fool with this. I mean, everyone knows this already. This reminds them of the status quo. And we'll go on from here. Last year, Americans paid the most tax. The federal government has collected the most tax it ever has. In relative terms, so that's to say, even given the fact that most people are either unemployed or earning less, definitely earning less in real terms, they still extracted the largest tax pool in the country's history. So you can expect that trend to continue, tightening, squeezing more. And it won't go on forever. There's a breaking point. There'll at least be leaks if there's not a complete collapse. But this is another aspect of the extreme pressure on people, among other factors, not least climate and harder realities like food availability, crop failures, and so on. In the meantime, in other news, which was or ought to have been the leading story, given that it's been the primary thing shoved in people's faces for the last 15 years, namely the war on terror. They've got a fine balancing act going on where it's still being shoved in people's faces. Terror, terror, terror. We arrested this guy. We found this suspect. He was plotting to do this. Oh, another terror attack, yada, yada. And yet the source of all this terrorism in recent years, as told to the people, namely Islamic State in Syria, it's hardly getting a mention. It's in passing. Oh, yeah, they've just retaken Palmyra from ISIS. And breaking news today is that Aleppo is about to fall from ISIS back into Damascus control. And, pay no attention to this, though. That's what the message is. That's something I can't get my head around. How long do they think they can keep this up where it's a non-stop barrage of stories about how there's going to be more terror and more, and it's going to get worse and worse. And the thing they've identified as a source of all that terrorism is weakening significantly, at least in Syria. Iraq's another story. One particular item from this week is the confession of some guy they said was the man in the hat at Brussels airport.
Mm-hmm.
Abrini, I think his name is. Yeah, I want. It reminded me of the confessions of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. We're going back 10 years here, but this is a guy who they waterboarded 183 times until he confessed to being the mastermind of 9/11 and the attempt on the lives of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and 30 other crimes. Apparently he was talking so much that they couldn't get him to shut up. They either gave him drugs after torturing him or they simply put words in his mouth. So yes, that was one item. A second item was the bizarre. I mean, there's no logic. You can't even deduct anything from what they're trying to really say to people. But supposedly, the Brussels terror attacks were done on the fly because what they really wanted to do was attack Paris, but they took a wrong turn or something and ended up in Brussels or some BS like that. But there's clearly a serious effort underway to bring home the message, I think, to Europe as a whole, that you all need to get serious about terrorism. You're not serious enough.
Yeah.
We want to see borders closed. We want to see torture accepted. Forget all this liberal stuff about, actually helping people.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic. I mean, it's obviously a mass manipulation of people's perception of the world. It seems they want just everybody to have a very kind of negative and afraid and kind of dark view of the world. And of course, people will be distracted by ordinary life and stuff. But I think it has its kind of subtle and pernicious psychological effect where it's in the back of their minds all the time. You know what I mean? Where they find themselves doing things that they didn't do before. It's basically engendering a sense of insecurity in people. They'll find themselves looking at, for example, anybody who looks like whether of Muslim, that they're practicing Muslim, or if they're of Arab extraction, or if they're of Muslim extraction. If they're if they're from Muslimlandia, which is that place where all the Muslims live. Anybody that looks like that, you're wary. I mean, it generates a feeling of insecurity in people, and and just being out. I mean, in the back of people's minds, being out in a shopping center or in a metro station or in an airport or flying on of course 9/11 did a lot for that, but flying on an airplane, just the general kind of background fear that might that is increased in people. Apparently this is Muslimistan. The general background fear that people experience is something that they seem to want. For some reason, it serves their purpose in some way or other. But on the ISIS thing, yeah, it's very interesting. The whole ISIS thing, really, from a psychological perspective, and how they've been able to create that image of ISIS and what it's able to do and what it has done, etc., etc. And I mean, that's why we we're all very happy to see Russia come in over the past 6 months or so and just kind of like expose it for what it really was, which is just a ragtag bunch of fairly well trained and equipped mercenaries in the pay of Western powers and with the connivance of the Saudis and the Turks, whatever, to wage a war on Syria, and that's exactly what it is. But I mean, the way it's been promoted, and I mean, the whole thing is just very, very, very suspicious, and very, very dubious about how a group of people, whatever, I don't know, we don't know the numbers, 20, 30,000 of them, whatever, could get together and, appear onto the Western scene, the Western media scene, before the Western public's eyes in this horrible, brutal fashion. I mean, it was a real caricature. I mean, they were the classic kind of evil, the stuff from your worst nightmares type of thing, and they were personified into this ISIS group that, we can't do anything about. And I mean, the whole thing was just so transparent. I mean, I just go, what the frick? I mean, what's wrong with people, really? Like, I mean, you have, Western powers every other day. Assad must go. Assad's an evil dictator. Assad's bombing his own people. Assad killed Jesus and Santa Claus and JFK and faked the moon landings and whatever. They're responsible for everything possibly that is ever bad, everything bad that's ever happened, and anything that possibly could happen bad to you. They're responsible. They're your worst nightmare. And that's the Assad regime. And so they're saying this, and they're making it really, really clear that they want to overthrow the Assad government. And then you have this ISIS group who is doing exactly that. But at the same time, they're saying ISIS is really bad, but, they're doing what we want them to do. And we can't do anything about them, sorry. I mean, they're really terrible. They're a threat to the entire civilized world. But our bombs keep missing them, coincidentally. And they're doing what we want to see happen, which is overthrow the Assad government. But we hate them.
And you should be afraid of them.
You should be afraid of them, and we hate them. But I don't know how else to say this, ISIS are all right, they're not so bad, really, because they're doing what we want them to do. In fact, we actually support ISIS. I mean, okay, let me spell it out to you. I mean, do you have any brains at all? These are a bunch of jihadi mercenaries that came out of nowhere that some French reporter who was caught by them and was imprisoned by them, whatever, for 10 months, said they didn't even have Qurans. I don't know. I don't know what the boogeyman looks like. What's a scary monster from your childhood or something, or from books, I don't know. Dracula or something, I mean, they could all just be dressed up in Dracula outfits, with fake fangs and stuff, and flapping their capes across Syria, and that would basically, effectively be the same, have the same effect on people. Well, actually, it would be funnier, but it's bizarre that people can't make that connection, that when you have Western governments all saying Assad must go, Assad's evil, he's a brutal dictator, he's killed his own people, we hate Assad, and then you have an ISIS mercenary army coming in saying we hate Assad, we're going to get rid of him, we hate Assad, and you don't make the connection between those two people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when your Western governments are saying, yeah, we can't do anything about them. We were able to invade Iraq, bomb and invade Iraq, provide shock and awe to Iraq, and then invade the country for 10 years with 200,000 troops. But ISIS is way worse. That's what they say. ISIS is way worse than Saddam Hussein ever was. But we can't do anything about them. Well, if ISIS is way worse, how come? Where's your 200,000 troops plus your 200,000 pasty white mercenaries that you send in? So basically, where's your more or less 500,000 armed soldiers that you sent to Iraq over a period of 10 or 12 years? Well, did you fire them or something? Are they not?
Some of them were
available?
hired. This is another reason why London is evil. Some of them were hired by mercenaries, private armies, private contractors, and they're popping up in Yemen. Estimated a couple of thousand British soldiers who had fought in Iraq are now fighting on behalf of what is essentially a Western corporate war in Yemen, ostensibly against Al-Qaeda in Yemen, but really to suppress an uprising and to maintain strict control of the Gulf of Aden.
So they're otherwise occupied, is that?
I think a lot of them are, really.
Where's all the US troops?
A lot of them are working for these private contractors.
No, but there's actually US troops as well. There's still a big contingent of US troops that all came home from Iraq. And Afghanistan.
A lot of them are probably homeless.
Homeless, yeah. So they have been fired.
Or going nuts.
So that's why we couldn't get ISIS, because we fired all the soldiers. It's just bonkers, It's just complete and utter nonsense. And if people could just stop a minute and say, okay, just call a spade type thing and go, look, this is screamingly obvious here that what's going on. I mean, by their own admission, it serves their agenda, and people get, qui bono, who benefits and stuff. But that, I mean, if there was some intrigue in your own neighbourhood or in your own family, you have no problem figuring out who was behind it, Who stole the whiskey? Yeah, it's my drunk uncle. He had means, motive, and opportunity, He's been talking about whiskey all week, and then my whiskey bottle disappears. It's empty. Who did it? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it was ISIS.
He's blaming little Johnny.
Yeah, exactly, He's blaming, and it's like, he's blaming your granny, And you're like, dude, it's not that complicated, really.
Something remarkable happened last week in the US. I think it's remarkable because it's the first time I saw it in a long time. There was a nationwide strike. Well, it didn't affect the entire nation, but it was a pretty widespread strike of air traffic controllers. There are not many strikes these days across the US. Why do I bring that up? Going back to what you're saying about the people's labour and the sweat of their brow being the juice in the end.
Funneled upwards.
The system is trying to suck out of people.
Yeah, it's a big straw sucking people's life force out.
The US is the advanced state. This is what they want Europe to become, of course, where there are rarely strikes because the labour mentality, the cohesiveness that would provoke a common reaction among people. Hang on a second, this isn't right what you're doing to us, is all but destroyed. Last week being an exception, where there was an actual fairly big strike. Now, come back to France. Terror. There have been terror attacks in Paris twice last year. Now one in Brussels. It should have been for Paris. They're throwing, they're going pretty hard at it here. Are people not It's illegal to protest at the moment because there's a state of emergency in France. People are out on the streets like up in arms, not about anything to do with anything phony or colour revolution. Like, they're protesting the same old basic stuff, which is labour reform, i.e. you guys squeezing more from us.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm getting at is they got a problem because it's not quite taking hold. I think if I could imagine someone plotting all of this from above or whatever 15, 20 years ago, they'd have hoped that by now this kind of thing would not be happening anymore.
Mm-hmm. People will be compliant.
But it hasn't taken hold in France anyway.
I don't think it's taken hold in a lot of places, and the problem is that when you watch the news, and the media will select particular stories and particular demographics or sections of the population to express extremist views, and then everybody thinks, oh my God, But there, like we often say, there's a kind of silent majority out there, or possibly a silent majority, who don't say anything. Who just sit and watch and go, there's something, no, I don't like any of this. This is stupid, It's all stupid, And it's those people that, these people in the powers that be, whatever you want to call them, like you said, hoping, surely they would have hoped by now they would have had it locked down, they would have influenced everybody and had their plan would be complete type thing, And I think they tend to, want to convince themselves that that's the case, and through the media, they keep on encouraging the media to ramp up the fear factor and to push it in people's faces and stuff. And in that way,
to remind them why they need us,
right? And hope by that way that it'll spread. The fear factor will spread around everybody. But like you're saying, a lot of people are just, the bottom line for them is, I think probably for them a major problem is actually the indifference to a certain extent, the indifference of people or the apathy of people. That's bad enough as it is, but it's actually quite bad for the powers that be, I think, because while apathy may, amongst a large percentage of the population, may allow the elite or whatever to get away with a lot of things, people just don't care and ignore it. They're apathetic. But that also prevents their plan of instilling fear and turning people into reaction machines from really taking hold, like you're saying as well, because people ultimately, if they're faced with a choice of, getting out in the streets and, protest, talking about, imprison all the Muslims or something like that, most people are like, I couldn't be bothered. I just couldn't be bothered with that. There's only a small section of the nut jobs who'll do that. The media focus on them and try and get the great apathetic unwashed to come and join them. But the great apathetic unwashed are just apathetic, and they're like, I'm just going to watch more reality TV show this week because you've pushed kind of terror attacks in my face. I'm just going to watch. I'm going to dissociate even more. Yeah. And that's not a good thing. That's not ideal. But I think that's what's a problem for these people who are trying to provoke or engaging in kind of social engineering, whatever you want to call it, that people ultimately aren't, in their hearts, aren't inclined towards, mad, fear-based reactions in the sense of, large numbers of people all getting out onto the streets and calling for something in a against each other, effectively, like the idea of getting Western populations to all get in the streets and call for the imprisonment of Muslims or put them all in detention camps. People are very disinclined to do that because they realize that, well, ultimately, I live with these people. The people are in my society, and there's an identification with ordinary people. As much as you can drive a wedge between us and them, and black, dark-skinned, and white-skinned, whatever, people, there's a tendency to cooperation and cohabitation amongst ordinary people. The bigger difference, and a difference that is more readily identifiable, I think, for ordinary people, is the difference between them and the elite. Because, put it this way, if you walk down the street, if you go down the street every day and you go into a bread shop or delicatessen or a supermarket or whatever, a small local shop, and you see somebody who's a Muslim, and you see him or her every day, and you know them, you even speak to them, there's a commonality there, an identification, and you're going to have to really, don't even know if it's possible for any propaganda machine to create a situation where that person would suddenly turn around and say, that person, that Muslim that I know, that I talk to as a acquaintance, whatever, and seems like a nice person, should be in a detention camp. But the same person who walks down the street every day, and just because of where he or she lives, they see a fat cat politician swanning past or flying past in a black tinted window Mercedes, driving in the puddles and splashing you. And then, he's not one of us. I don't know that person. I'm never going to know him. And there's a very big difference between me and him. Mm-hmm. And I know it. And with revelations like this coming out, that confirms that difference, between like this different set of rules even, and people know that. And there's a different set of tax rules, obviously, between us and the elite. But me and the Muslim guy I know, who gets bread in the same shop as me, I know that me and him live under the same rules. I see him going to the same store. I see him going to his job every morning. I see him picking up his kids. He does exactly the same things as me. I never see that fat cat in the Mercedes doing any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. So the people that are playing a kind of dangerous game in terms of winding up the tension and provoking people, provoking distress in people, and squeezing people and making their lives harder, and thinking that they can use that and turn it against each other. History would suggest that very often when people want to reach that breaking point and are forced out to take some radical action, kind of knee-jerk, instinctive action because they're suffering, they're not going to take it against the person in the street of whatever creed or
at least
or faith, color,
not
creed or faith. They're gonna if it's gonna happen, it's gonna be storming the Bastille or storming the the Elysee or storming 10 Downing
Which
Street.
might still have a very bloody outcome, but at least
it's a bit of a reckoning,
It's a reckoning rather than. I mean, the alternative's horrible. We watch the slow death of everything with camps, and it drags it out, the existence of this system.
Yeah.
Oh, please no. Make it quick and fast. The one thing to keep in mind is that we've had a precedent in the 20th century where Nazification in Europe did successfully get people to be ratting on others in line with the narrative they were told about them. It was fairly successful. Maybe one big difference, though, is that came on quick and fast. Mm-hmm. And it was so quick and fast, it never had a chance of being sustainable.
Right. And
these guys today are going for global, and they're going for full-time, eternal lockdown.
You're talking about a different world back then as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the thing that facilitated the kind of Nazification, Nazi Germany and all that kind of stuff was the kind of global empires and the competing major powers fighting with each other and all that kind of stuff and having world wars. And a result of that was, the fact that they had empires. But today we're living with the result of those empires, which is much compared to 70, 80 years ago in Germany, we're living in a much more multicultural and multi-religious society in Europe and in the West. People growing up, most people alive today have grown up with foreigners
in their midst,
and at the same time, like I'm saying, the majority of them are ordinary people who are living side by side with these other people who are also ordinary people, and they see them as ordinary people and know them as ordinary people. So it's not really, they don't have the same conditions today to be able to turn people against each other as they did 70 years ago in Europe, where Europe was largely,
I found myself agreeing with you there, but then I remembered that the minority they turned German against were living in the midst. Jews.
Well, Jews, yeah. But
they looked like them.
Right.
For the most part.
Yeah. But that's a That's a different topic, really, in a certain sense. And I think, people are ratting on each other. And I mean, I think in terms of Nazi Germany, I think an awful lot was done by the kind of a small number of people, a relatively small number of people. It wasn't the whole German nation type thing. The vast majority of Germans just turned a blind eye.
Yeah.
So the only way I think I could see this similar kind of thing happening again is would be the same conditions where you'd have the minority of right wing crazy nut jobs in society who would sign up, put on the brown shirts or the costume, and take the oath, and then go and do the dirty work, and they would hope, I suppose, they would expect that the rest of the majority of ordinary people would just do the same thing again and turn a blind eye, But I don't think it'll be that. I don't think it's that simple anymore. Partly because, I mean, the problem with the Nazi Germany thing is that it's there as a precedent, the never again thing. You didn't really have that in the 1930s and 40s. You didn't have a popular cultural history that everybody was aware of this bad thing happening that happened in living memory, and now we're going to do it again. So that's an impediment, I mean, it's like you do one thing and then you have a problem doing it again, exactly the same tactics, relatively recently or relatively soon afterwards. Yeah. Because people remember and say, hang on, that was bad. We shouldn't do that again. Yeah. You just bring it once. That's your kind of trump card to a certain extent, and you have to get very creative to try and create the same conditions again.
Indeed. If it's coming, it's incremental, and at every step of the way, it makes sense. People themselves demand it. Yeah. It could be closing the borders within Europe. We need more security, and facts on the ground make it evident that this next innocent-looking step is the correct one to take. The way it's probably working this time around is that before you know it, the whole atmosphere has changed and the structure is in place, and it's too late. Quick note, the Boston Globe ran a phony, fake, pretend front page a couple of days ago, where the date they gave was April, a year from now, 2017. And it's President Trump orders mass deportations to begin or something. There's Trump in front of a White House lectern and so on. And then there's pretend stories either side of it. And, I think it was part of an editorial saying, we're not really going to go down this way, are we? I think they are rallying people now, or however much the media in the US flirted with the idea of Trump being president. I think they are going to rally against Trump, which is an interesting, if you think that the end goal is precisely the kind of things Trump talks about that they would like. Lockdown borders, detention camps, hard-ass attitude about everything towards everyone. They've held him up as, this guy personifies all of it, apparently. And then, no. They sort of held him up as, this is what you want. No, it isn't. Okay, we remove him out of the picture. Don't worry, it's not going to happen. You'll have Hillary Clinton. She'll be nice and fair and just as evil, but at least we'll keep it covert.
Not ostensive, not officially as evil, or not overtly as evil. She's covertly evil, but I mean, it doesn't take too much to look below this, scratch the surface, and you see this evil witch. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that that's Trump's kind of major role to play, which is that he's presented as the guy that nobody wants, but scarily, frighteningly seems to be gaining some traction. So let's swing everybody in the last minute, have him have this campaign of where he's talking about all sorts of ridiculous ideas, hard ass, hard nosed kind of stuff, and designed to push people towards the really, I mean, in that sense, Donald Trump's the Dad Coke of evil, and the fully caffeinated, full sugar evil is Hillary Clinton. and and they want to. But Donald Trump is, making a lot of noise about being evil, basically, and scaring people with his rhetoric and stuff, so as to push people in the last moment and say, well, no, we can't really do that. People have a pang of conscience at the last minute, and everybody will vote for Hillary, and it's a trap. It's you've been baited into voting for real evil. Because Trump's just a buffoon. You know what I mean? More than anything else. He talks like a child, basically, and, he can't be taken seriously. But Thorbjorn just said there, actually, that they didn't have any trouble. He said they didn't have any trouble doing something. They were quite successful turning people against each other in Ukraine, in reference to our discussion about being able to turn people against each other, that they were able to turn people against each other in Ukraine. But Ukraine's a slightly different context in the sense that they had a war there. They actually, they unleashed a war where a chunk of Ukraine broke away, and then the Ukrainian Kiev authorities, basically launched a war, their silly, stupidly named anti-terrorist operation, and lasted. It's still ongoing to a certain extent, but it lasted for a good, 6 months to a year, in an intense way. And that, sure, if you're willing to actually have an actual war on your territory, then yeah, you can. Well, all bets are off. You can turn people, put people into their camps, into their, their respective camps, and they'll hate each other, and especially because you're inflicting a lot of trauma, and the dividing. What people really hate about that situation is the division of their country, what they identify as their country or their community, and the division of it. Yeah, if you can provoke that, but I think you have to go to extremes to do that, and they're trying to do that. As we were saying, they're trying to do that kind of indirectly with asymmetric warfare, in the sense of phony terror attacks, having bombings and things like that, and blaming it on ISIS / maybe Muslims in general type of thing. But that's very watered down and not very, in no way clear cut enough for ordinary people to go with the narrative of you should hate all Muslims. You would really have to, for example, if it was in France or something, you'd have to have some ISIS army either rise up or invade France in some way, and then a section of the French Muslims to join them and declare a breakaway republic. Yeah, that's to actually mirror the same or match the same conditions as in Ukraine. That's what you have to do. But that's a far cry from, or having the odd bombing by patsies, ISIS patsies in a train station or in an airport is a far cry from what is effectively a fully fledged war on your territory. Anyway,
just before we go, then, speaking of Yukistan, our dear friend Yats has been booted.
Oh, he booted himself.
Yatsenyuk.
2 years. Arsonhead.
2 years as Prime Minister of Yukistan. You will be sorely missed. Not. Any ideas who's going to line up to replace him? I'm thinking back to what Newland said in 2014. She was caught on tape saying, discussing potential candidates for the post-coup regime in Kiev. What did you say about Klitschko, the boxer?
Oh, can't have Klitschko because he has to go.
He wanted the post, didn't he?
He was possible, but he had to go and do his political homework because he was a bit of a political newbie.
So they gave him the mayorship of Kiev.
He got the mayorship of Kiev and handed out accolades, basically handed out positions after staging their coup. Said, okay, now you can have, for saying the right things and for following along with our Western-backed coup, you can be the mayor of Kiev, and Porkishenko, the chocolate mogul, Willy Wonka can be the president. And several other people can. What position would you like?
Oh, it's going to be successfully, maybe.
Yes, I think Newland herself should just come in and take the job, like, and just be honest about it. And she should just declare herself.
But you could send Biden for an attaboy with Sax Philly. He can get promoted from Odessa.
I'm a whale Ukrainian.
I bet he's on the phone big time.
Yeah,
to
I want to be
Washington.
president.
I want it.
I want Prime Minister. I'm whale Ukrainian.
And then they just need Jeff Piat. He can get on the phone and get the deets to stick.
Deets can all be stuck. Yeah, with some super glue. And
Poor Ukraine.
Yeah, poor Ukraine. Made a mess of it. But, you know, they just subverted the whole thing and ran it into the ground. And that's, maybe they'll learn, you know. Maybe some Ukrainian people will get a clue. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for this week, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back next week with another show on another topic. Until then,